Today we'll discuss the story of Joan of Arc, a major figure in Western and French history, as well as taking the opportunity to put some order into many perceptions about her. However, I want to reassure the lovers of French history and other Johannists who are watching me right away. This aims to correct common mistakes and clarify details about her. It's not meant to disparage any character or symbol. Joan of Arc, known as Saint Joan of Arc to Catholics, is a figure shrouded in mysteries and legends. She is often described as a poor and illiterate shepherdess from Lorraine, guided by heavenly voices that supposedly commanded her to expel the English from France. But what about it? Does this description match the historical figure? We will see it together. There are also many other questions that arise about her, to which we will answer, for example, about her origins, which some think are noble, even royal, about her supposed skills that could only come from a noble education, or even considering the role she actually played, which some authors minimize and others generally maximize according to their sensitivity. Fortunately, the epic of Joan of Arc is well documented, notably thanks to her two trials, the first condemning and executing her in 1431, and the second rehabilitating her several years after her death in 455. It is thanks to these two trials allowing access to raw sources as well as based on the work of historians. Assembling a bunch of other elements and whose names are indicated in the description, is this the perspective that I am sharing with you today? Let's get to the heart of the matter. First of all, a bit of context. The 100 Years' War, a lengthy conflict spanning the 14th and 15th centuries, is currently underway. It set different French throne claimants against one another over time. These were from two great feudal dynasties, the Plantagenet dynasty, who were already masters of England and many French territories, and the Valois branch of the Capetian dynasty, which is the dynasty that has ruled France since the 10th century. Joan of Arc was born in 1412 during the reign of King Charles VI of France. At least it is assumed, as they were not certain of her age when the question was asked during her trial. She was born in the village of Domremy, a village located on the Meuse, but which was not at the time technically in Lorraine. Why? Well, simply because the Lorraine of that time was not the same as the one we have the pleasure of admiring today. The local allegiance map was complex, split between the Kingdom of France, the Duke of Burgundy, and the Holy Roman Empire. Domremy was split in two during Joan's era. The northern part of her birth village was under the royal Châtellenie of Vaucouleurs, which was loyal to the Valois family. These forces would later be loyal to Charles VII the Dauphin, and heir to the French throne. The south of the village, on the other hand, was dependent on the Barrois Mouvant, a territory also historically dependent on the Kingdom of France. This area was near Burgundian lands and the border of Lorraine, which belonged to the Holy Roman Empire at the time. Joan grew up in an environment loyal to the French crown, administratively complex and marked by war. As it turns out, Lorraine was not the poor shepherdess sometimes portrayed. She was not poor. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, from whom she got her last name, as you guessed, was not only a plowman, that is to say a landowner and operator, but also the dean of Domremy, that is to say roughly a kind of mayor. Despite living off the land, he was not poor and held a significant social status within his territory. And the shepherdess, well, her father wasn't a shepherd. The two trials also clearly indicate that she did not consider herself a shepherdess, and she was not considered as such by the people of her village. So, where does this image originate from? The answer is simple. The pure and simple shepherdess guiding her flock is a recurring symbol of Christianity. At the time, it was said that bishops fulfilled a pastoral office, a term originally referring to shepherds. Jean's and the Valois supporters spread this image after her death for political reasons and to legitimize Charles VII. Around 1425, when Jean was about 13 years old, she started hearing voices, usually accompanied by visions. By the way, a significant detail, as the experience must have profoundly impacted her, guiding her to seek out Dauphin Charles VII and engage in the conflict. But why so? In 1420, the Treaty of Troyes was approved, exploiting the mental instability of France's King Charles VI. This treaty disinherits Charles VII and offers the kingdom to Henry, King of England, upon Charles VI's death in October 1422. Of course, Charles VII does not let this happen, and following him, many French lords and nobles do not accept this treaty. The captain of Vaucouleurs is one of them. The fighting escalates, and despite Scottish help and some successes, the French lose. The crucial Battle of Verneuil resulted in a challenging situation for Charles, forcing him to retreat behind the natural defense of the Loire River, and more specifically in Bourges. Little Jean then finds a way to go to Vaucouleurs to meet the captain of the castle, Robert de Baudricourt. He first sends her home, but she persists, and he finally gives her a chance in February 1429 after having her exorcised. Just that, to make sure she wasn't sent or possessed by some malevolent forces. Having passed this test, Baudricourt becomes less skeptical and prepares her a military equipment and an escort, allowing her to set off at the end of February for the Loire. In early March, she arrives in Chinon, where Charles VII, nicknamed the King of Bourges since his retreat, was located. Joan meets the Dauphin and declares him the true heir to the French throne by God's grace. Afterwards, she undergoes several theological and physical tests, especially of her virginity, which was then a sign of purity crucial to her role as a divine messenger and proof that she was not a potential witch. She then leaves for Orleans with a small reinforcement army and supplies. Why Orleans? Well, the city has been under siege for several months. The English have secured their position in fortresses they have built or forcibly taken around the city. The arrival of reinforcements roughly balances the forces at hand. Although the English troops are superior in quality due to their extensive training, with some being almost professional. So the balance still tips in favor of the English. Jean's arrival is decisive, but unexpectedly so. Despite claims by some commentators, she isn't truly leading the troops since she lacks military experience, and she was not noble. But then what is she for? Well, it's on a moral level that she's going to have a major impact both on the French troops and the English troops. Confident, charismatic, and brave, she leads the troops and creates a momentum that will disrupt English plans many times. Her first victories restore confidence to the French and sow doubt among the English by demonstrating that they could be defeated. Although she does not really give orders at this time, nor does she command an army, her intervention thus tips the balance in favor of the French by boosting their morale, allowing for bold and unexpected actions. This was achieved with inferior troops. This effort, triggered by her arrival, allows the siege of Orleans, which had lasted for 8 months, to be lifted in just 8 days. Based on your comment, it appears that her impact was not described as marginal. That being said, it is equally clear that she did not win this victory alone. Attributing the French victory entirely to her during this siege doesn't make much sense. Without Jean de Dunois and the French captains and knights, without the troops' support and the notable courage of Orleans inhabitants mobilizing resources to defend the city, the urban minister's valiant effort was crucial for this victory to take place. However, without her, it is uncertain if this turnaround would have happened, as morality was a crucial factor. The Battle of Patay took place on June 18, 1429, following Orléans, a beautiful French victory where the vanguard of the French army routs what remains of the English army that had besieged Orléans, as well as an English relief army that had joined them. This victory, in which Joan did not directly participate as she was not with the vanguard, causes heavy losses among English elite archers and allows capture of several enemy commanders. It's a big blow for the English, who open many doors to the French. Joan of Arc then urges the king to go to Reims to be crowned. Why Reims? Well, because Reims is the city where the kings of France were traditionally crowned and also received divine legitimacy to rule. This was crucial to Joan, both personally and politically. Charles VII follows her advice even though the city lies in hostile territory, making the journey extremely perilous. The royal army then sets off for Reims at the end of June. He reaches the city, which surrenders without a fight on July 16th. The following day, Charles VII is crowned. This event is far from insignificant, and its political impact is major. In fact, the 7-year-old Henry VI, the young King of England, has not yet been crowned King of France. Despite being the theoretical heir based on the Treaty of Troyes, the coronation's legitimacy will bolster Charles VII d'Austria's military and diplomatic endeavors. Joan of Arc played a crucial role in convincing the king to proceed with the coronation. However, it is following this coronation that Joan is more harshly confronted with certain resistances within the entourage of the now King of France and his hesitations. In fact, Charles VII seems to want to buy time and rely on his newly acquired legitimacy in order to strengthen his situation, particularly by negotiating with Burgundy, a position to which Joan was firmly opposed. You can easily understand that this is going to cause sparks. Joan quickly takes charge and leads troops to attack Paris, without strong support from the king, who nonetheless allows it. After the failed assault, Charles VII orders a retreat to the Loire due to the lack of an offensive strategy, much to Joan's dismay. To make matters worse, she finds herself without an army from then on. However, through her charisma, a key trait of the character as previously mentioned, she rallies a group of volunteers. She leads them into multiple skirmishes with little success. Her lack of resources and real military skills undoubtedly play a significant role in all of this. Later in May 1430, after spending more time with King Charles VII, she leaves the court without saying goodbye, a clear sign of her frustration. She takes a new group of volunteers that she mobilizes once again to lift the siege of Compiègne, besieged by the Burgundians. When I told you she was particularly charismatic and confident in her mission, here's an illustration. But on May 23, 1430, as she attempts an exit, things go particularly badly, and the troops retreat in disaster toward the city. To protect Compiègne, the captain in charge of its defense shuts the city gates after allowing in as many troops as possible. Joan of Arc arrives too late and is locked outside the walls with other stragglers, leading to her capture by the Burgundians. Some several years later believe there to have been a betrayal by the captain. Contemporaries saw the situation as a reality of war, and most modern historians also reject the betrayal hypothesis. In fact, the captain of Compiègne will valiantly defend the city until a relief army loyal to Charles VII arrives and will never be dismissed. An additional element that at least rules out a betrayal orchestrated by the Burgundians. From then on, Joan remains a Burgundian captive. However, Charles VII put little effort into freeing her, likely believing he had time to negotiate a ransom, a common practice during that period. And quite happy to, temporarily, he thinks, no longer have Joan underfoot, especially to quietly negotiate with Burgundy. Other views suggest an ungrateful desire of the king to simply get rid of Joan, based particularly on the mutual annoyance that seemed to exist between the two and the lack of vigor in Charles VII's action. The fact is that in the end, 1430, the Burgundians sell Joan to the English, who move her to Rouen to do her, a trial whose objective is, in essence, to discredit her and thus discredit the one she had crowned, King Charles VII. The companions of the maiden, active from her capture, will then try to free her vigorously. A number of them, including Dunois, Poton-l'Exentrail, and La Hire, aware of the aims of this trial, will go with the financial support of Charles VII's. It's crucial to specify this considering the prior hypotheses, even to the extent of staging a coup to free Joan from prison. The operation fails and some of her companions are captured. The King of France's role in this matter is unclear and lacks vigor, but to talk about abandonment or even outright betrayal does not seem as obvious as I thought either. Before my interest in the subject, Charles VII often seemed to lack a coherent strategy and vision on many issues. His indecisiveness and lukewarmness are also notable. This is only my understanding of the subject. The hypothesis of a guilty laissez-faire and a major political miscalculation appears most consistent with the character. Not that the other hypotheses are absurd. On the contrary, if you have other perspectives on the subject, feel free to share them with me in the comments. The trial starts in January 1431 and lasts for several months. Contrary to what I expected, it is far from being expeditive or arbitrary in its form and is instead carried out methodically. The expected result is fairly certain. After a lengthy process, a questionable abjuration by Jean and her alleged relapse, she is ultimately condemned for two reasons: heresy, and wearing men's clothes which were unsuitable for her sex. However, she is not condemned for witchcraft, contrary to what is sometimes said. No link or evidence was established during the trial with such practices. As a side note, I was particularly surprised by the consistency and strength of her statements during this trial. And this despite her young age. According to Jean, she was only around 19 years old during the trial. When you see that most of us at the same age are more likely to be painting our faces. To end up counting boogers on the kitchen table at 3 in the morning, there is indeed something to be impressed about. Her eloquence and coherence are all the more impressive when you take into account the many pressures she is under. Both during the hearings and outside, the English, for example, do not hesitate to come and bully or humiliate her in the middle of the night. Reading her and being aware of the context surrounding her, we realize how deep her convictions are and how particularly sincere her approach seems. I invite you to read the trial if you have the opportunity to form your own opinion. If you're interested, I've put a link to an online version in the description. That's it for the parenthesis. The young woman's trial ends terribly with her being sentenced to burn at the stake. It's May 30th, 1431 in Rouen, where Joan of Arc succumbs, burned alive. However, there are still several legitimate questions I have not had the chance to answer. First of all, Joan seems to know how to ride a horse, even though she is a farmer's daughter. Like some of you, I ask myself why. The most credible hypothesis is quite simple and is due to the fact that she has probably already ridden her father's draft animals during their various movements, understanding draft horses and donkeys. Riding a battle-ready horse, especially in armor, is clearly different and far more impressive. But a good part of this difficulty comes from the apprehension one can have about horse riding. There were clearly many things about which Joan did not seem to feel the slightest fear or doubt. Her state of mind may have also played a role in all of this. Then could she read and write? Well, no, it doesn't seem that she knew how to read or write, Joan dictating her letters and clearly not being able to read them back. Historian Colette Bone also adopted this hypothesis, even though she specifies that it's possible she gradually and superficially familiarized herself with certain aspects of reading. Did Joan of Arc speak the French of that time after arriving at the Dauphin's court? Yes, but with an accent and regional dialect elements from her place of origin. Her nickname, Maid of Orleans, was not given to her during her lifetime, but was likely coined in the 16th century, long after her death. In her lifetime, she was simply nicknamed the Maid, which doesn't necessarily mean the Virgin, though she seemed to be. But the linguistic uses of the time would call her a girl or young woman. Did Joan finally boot the English out of France, as the legend would have it? Well, as you've understood, that's not the case either. At her death, Paris, which she had vainly tried to storm, was still in the hands of the English, and there was still much ground to regain. On the other hand, her intervention is decisive, as we have seen, and triggers a real turning point in the dynamics of the war. English troops will remain on French soil for up to 45 years after Joan's death, nearly half a century. Joan of Arc is an extraordinary historical figure due to her actions, character, and impact in the 100 Years' War. She is a shooting star of history, brilliant and brief in her own way. And yes, you say, although in the end, there is barely more than a year between her departure from Vaucouleurs at the end of February, 1429, and her capture at Compiègne in May, 1431, her intervention was significant enough to etch her name in the annals of history. Another significant reason Joan of Arc remains a topic of frequent discussion and passionate debate is her enduring impact and controversial legacy. From her arrival at Vaucouleurs, she is used as a political tool and figurehead. As a result, the perspectives on her, including the perspectives of the time, as I have had the opportunity to observe in my readings, systematically and very clearly take left with a militant objective. So it goes well beyond simple bias. The goal is not to tell, but more to convince. Many stories and their subjects take liberties with what could have been reality, whether to make accusations or boast about exploits. As mentioned in the introduction, despite the numerous elements available on the Joan of Arc epic, reading between the lines can be challenging, even for some historians. So it is also because of its use and political nature that the appropriations of the character have been and are still particularly simple. Everything and its opposite has been written about her since her earliest successes. It is thus possible to make Jean out to be pretty much whatever one wants by picking out the right details, without necessarily worrying about the credibility of the source, its context, or even the consistency of the whole. I should clarify that all political sides have made this kind of shortcut before some people do. Consequently, they attempt to exploit Joan of Arc's character at some point. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, leave a comment. I did my best to offer you a clean perspective in line with our current knowledge. The subject is far from easy to unravel, as you've understood. You know how to support us, and all the right links are in the description. I'll simply finish by welcoming all those who have recently joined the channel, and I'll see you very soon.